Hello everyone, this is Kathy McGuigan from the Library of Congress. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon for our very special session on artful thinking from Project Zero and linking it to visual images from the Library of Congress. We have with us Susan Santoli. She is the director of the Secondary Social Studies Education Program at the University of South Alabama. She teaches social studies methods for secondary, undergraduate, and graduate social studies majors, as well as undergraduate and graduate courses across all majors. She is a recipient of the Teaching with Primary Sources grant, which focused on training of elementary education and secondary social studies students to use primary sources from the Library of Congress. She is co-editor of a book chapter on visual literacy and has numerous journal articles and presentations on integrating primary sources. Associate Professor Paige Vitulli is the director for the graduate P-12 Arts Education Program at the University of South Alabama. She teaches arts education for the early childhood and early elementary special education K-6 programs and directs the visual arts component of the USA Arts in Education Professional Development Grant, as well as the newly awarded Summer STEAM grants. Paige also teaches instructional design online classes for the college's graduate programs. Her passions include family, art, traveling, photography, technology, gardening, kayaking, and cooking. So I want to thank our presenters and I want to thank our participants. I know that my mic was hot just a few minutes ago, and I want to thank you for your patience. We have a great program lined up for you, and I'm going to turn things over to Susan and Paige.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. This is actually Susan talking right now. We are welcoming you from Mobile, Alabama, and we're excited to be with you and to see how many different grade levels and different geographic areas our participants are coming from. Tonight we want to share some activities with you based on the Library of Congress resources that you can use with artful thinking strategies: observing and describing, investigating and questioning, exploring perspectives, points of view, and making connections. Some will be activities that you can do very quickly and then expand should you have time to do that, and others will take a little bit longer to implement. We've been introduced to you, but we've included a little more information here as well as our email addresses. We feel like we're great collaborators as we bring different perspectives to activities. Paige looks at things from an artistic perspective, and I use a social scientist perspective, so we feel like we have a really good blend.
Hi, this is Paige Vitulli, and I'm so excited to speak today and to share these ideas with you and get feedback from all of you all over the United States. I want to start with just thinking about visual literacy and what visual literacy is, especially what it includes. Basically, I like to remember that when we think about visual literacy strategies, I think about Bloom's taxonomy, and it includes all of the levels of Bloom's. And visual literacy products include, but are not limited to, photographs, illustrations, maps, diagrams, ads. The works of art can be two-dimensional and three-dimensional. They can be moving, and it can be still media. And a very visually literate learner will take into consideration things like the context, the culture, ethics, aesthetics, and technical components.
I asked my pre-service teachers how many of them could read music, and several raised their hands. We discussed how the word read is used here, and in other ways when we use the word reading a knitting pattern, reading graphs or charts, and how reading in these cases doesn't mean text, but it definitely refers to a literacy. So when asking our students to analyze images, we have to guide them in developing that visual literacy, just like we would in textual literacy.
So what we're going to share with you today, the thoughts, the strategies, come from Project Zero. And we think about learning in and through the arts, just as all of the research-based activities at Project Zero advocate. There are many research initiatives there, multiple intelligences, things that can be learned. There's a Good at Play project. There's learning as a consequence of thinking and making learning visible. So one thing to think about that Project Zero emphasizes is how do we know students are learning and what types of learning is most relevant to our many different students. Specifically, Susan and I look at Artful Thinking. It's one of the several programs at Project Zero. And what we're talking about today is all linked by the theme at Artful Thinking, Visible Thinking. One of the several projects, Visible Thinking, has us look at the Artful Thinking palette with the many thinking dispositions. We're going to share 4 of the 6 with you and talk about the different examples that we use and activities that we use as well. The goal of this Artful Thinking program is to help the students develop thinking dispositions that support, again, thoughtful learning. So let's move to the 4 that we're going to talk about today. Observe and describe, question and investigate, explore viewpoints, compare and connect. I want to note, too, that these visual thinking dispositions are not necessarily in the hierarchy that they look like in this list. So we're going to progress through these in this order, but this does not need to be strictly followed in your activities. The palette is cyclical, and it just as a paint palette, it provides you with many colors, or in this case, thinking dispositions or strategies that you can choose that are relevant to your goals and to your objectives. Okay, we're going to start with observing. So as we think about observing, it is sensing. And we want to start with observing and not using words right away. The ability to observe without evaluating. Using observation without evaluating is a really effective way to communicate. So we want to encourage our students to experience it. They can use their senses like seeing. You can think about what you might hear, what you might smell, what you might taste, but experience this without the filters, and subjective perception is emphasized. The next part of observe and describe is describing. So this is where you're going to use your words to represent what you observe. So we can relate this to basic scientific observation. Making observations, of course, is a core skill of scientists. So we receive the information again through our senses. When we think about the formal analysis of art, I ask my art students to look at the elements of art. So when you describe, one thing to look for, which you're going to be doing in just a minute, is to look for those 7 elements. Look at the lines, look at the shapes, look at the forms, the space, the color, the value, and the texture. Also, of course, look at the subject matter. You may see people, animals, landforms, things that are man-made, things that are natural. Now, this is where we want you to start observing. We have provided an image, and in this image, take a minute to observe. Use your sense of sight and think about what you see. We'd like for you to share your thoughts and type your observations so you can start describing what you see in this visual representation. Make note of the features. Look at the subject matter. Look at the elements of art. I see smoke. Paul sees that they're sharing food.
Oh, burning eyes, that's a good one.
Terry sees bread. Bridget sees an ocean. Great observations. Keep describing. Keep looking. The act of sharing. Jennifer. Lee sees native people sitting. Paul indicates that some are well dressed. Ada sees a man with a gun. Oh, I like the way Leanne counted. 8 men, 2 women. Oh, Paul's already getting to the questions. Is there a minister in the black left? One thing that I focus on when I ask my students to observe and to describe, which is very difficult for us to do, is to not jump to inferences yet, to really just observe and describe what you see in the picture. A man with a beard, lots of hands. So I'm going to ask you to think about some questions as you continue to observe and describe and read each other's responses. Did you observe and describe features? Did you observe and describe similarities and differences? Did you observe and describe the subject matter? Also, are you looking at the elements of art? Are you looking at the lines and the colors and the shapes? I see Samantha is already looking at a variety of colors in the clothing. Of course, having an image that's not online makes that easier to see. These are just some of the questions that I just posed as you were participating and still are in this first level of the activity.
I think it's very hard, too, when you have some background knowledge about an image, not to launch past describing and go right into inferring. And so I think that that's a difficult thing for us to do, and sometimes for students to do as well.
Absolutely. So some variations of this activity as you continue to observe and describe. I'm having so much fun reading this. Sarah, I like your question. Is she handing out pancakes? But some variations include filtering or focusing on a specific part of the image. So very often, Susan and I will start with one part of the image and not share the entire image. And especially for our young students, that makes it not so overwhelming to see so much visually, and they can just focus on a part. They can also look at the whole thing, and then we can focus on the part. So we can go part to whole or whole to part with this strategy. So you can begin with that very zoomed in part and ask the learners to visually describe what they see, and then you can add more visual information to the task. This elaboration game requires you to ask one student to describe what they see in part of the image and then progress to the next. Additionally, the game can help students use more sophisticated descriptive vocabulary because they're building on each other. The collaboration and the building on ideas increases that community and that teamwork, and it models the power of a group effort.
I don't know why, but when I do this activity, I really like going from part to whole and revealing a little bit at a time, and then having the students actually add to their observations as we widen.
These are some pictures from my classroom, and this is another way that I facilitate this strategy of observing and describing in the art classroom. I use a set of laminated posters that I've collected over the years, and we use Post-it notes. I equip my students with a pen and a stack of Post-its. I display about 10 to 30 posters of various works of art, sometimes on tables, sometimes we display them on the walls, and the students are instructed to think of a word or a phrase to describe and stick to each poster. They must respond to each work of art without duplication, so they cannot duplicate their own words or the words of their classmates that are already on the posters. They walk around and they're allowed to talk if they talk about their perceptions and descriptions of the artwork. This always generates many conversations and initial reactions to a number of works, usually which are new to my students, increase vocabulary, they share their multiple perceptions and their descriptions. Susan and I have even done this at a visual literacy workshop with people from all over the world in Ireland. And these are just some more ideas about the Describe It Post-it activity that is so successful with students and having them look and just observe and describe. As you'll see in Artful Thinking at Project Zero, very similar activities like colors, lines, shapes, and looking at the elements of art are advocated. A looking 10 by 2 process is a great process where you look at an image quietly for 30 seconds, list 10 words or phrases, so you're brainstorming, and then repeat. We also want to think about how we can do this using all the fabulous technology tools. As I talk about VoiceThread and Padlet briefly, I'd love for you to add what technology resources that you might use on the chat, because I know there's so many out there. It's hard to keep up with all the new tools. But a variation is to use VoiceThread, which is one of my favorites. It's an online tool to share images and participate in the thinking strategies. You use your voice, you can use video, you can use text, and a community of people can respond in multiple modes. Padlet is another way to create and collaborate in the world. It's used internationally. It's user-friendly and intuitive, and it works with sight, sound, and touch. It's simple, and its linking really enhances collaboration. So please keep adding to the chat any other resources that you think would be useful for us to use with these strategies. Okay, we're going to move to the next strategy. So after the strategy of observe and describe, we're going to move to question and investigate. As I think about questioning, the questions that I pose are teacher constructed. But I like to start with student-constructed questions. So just yesterday, I did this in class. I shared with the students Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory. And if you're familiar with that work of art, you can just imagine what kind of questions the students had for the artist. So I share that work, and my initial question, which is a question that I want them to come up with, is if the artist or the photographer were in the room, what questions would you ask him? Teacher-constructed questions, of course, help us to scaffold their understanding and learning. Many times the students, of course, don't know what they don't know, and we want to guide that with the teacher-constructed questions. And the investigate part of that is how are you going to find the answers to your questions, the student-generated questions and the teacher-generated questions. So we investigate or carry out a systematic inquiry to discover that. That is our research. So let's go back to our image, and let's imagine that the artist is in the room. What questions would you ask the artist about this visual image? So please type your questions on the chat. And I know that some of you have already done that in the previous Observe and Describe.
Oh, Sarah, we love Wordle. That's a whole other presentation. We love Wordle for so many reasons and use it for so many things.
I like Patty's question. Why did you choose purple for the dress? Ah, good question for an artist. Were you actually there to observe that? Very good question. Why are the Native Americans seated?
And why was it created? That's always an important thing as well. In fact, each fall I do some activities dealing with Thanksgiving, and I ask the students to compare this to primary sources or other artistic representations of the first Thanksgiving, and we always look at the date that something was created and try to discuss how that might have influenced the content. I think it certainly does here.
I think Karen's question is always important. When did you paint this? And that's getting back at the date, right? Oh, like Clarissia's, why is there no eye contact between the people in the scene? Interesting if you look at the line of vision. And what I like about having the students generate questions, it causes us to go back and look at the image with more detail. And of course you can do this using the technology, using whiteboards, using the Post-it notes, high-tech or low-tech, and everything in between. Great. Keep adding those questions because I look forward to going back and reviewing those. The third strategy that we're going to consider is exploring viewpoints. So as we explore viewpoints, of course, this is going to require some analysis, some higher level thinking, asking what, where, when, and why. It's a great place to add more visual images. This is where you can add more primary documents that are related, more artifacts, and as you might imagine, given some background knowledge, which we have, there are multiple versions and images depicting similar events, such as this one. Different people have different viewpoints based on their knowledge or lack of knowledge and based on their experiences. And then artistic vision, that's a whole lesson upon itself in my book, but that's a great thing to consider as we explore multiple viewpoints. So once again, as you're looking at this image, we can revisit this painting and consider multiple viewpoints. We could take on the role of each of the people, and a fun activity is to add speech bubbles with statements above their heads to get the conversation started. The students love to do this. I've done it with a class using the Post-it speech bubbles, and the students change out the viewpoints and statements to illustrate their varied perspectives and points of view, and it's a very enlightening activity. So in quotation marks, as we're moving on, if you want to have any viewpoints that the different people in the painting might have, feel free to do that. And this is going to bring me to our fourth strategy, which is compare and connect. So thinking about our image that you've been considering, I want to talk about how I think about reading and literacy education. And I know that many connections of text to self, text to image, and text to the world are often used to enhance thinking about text in many ways and comprehension. So I want to extend that to images. So I advocate that we think about image to self. How do you relate to this image? What are your similar experiences? Image to image. How does this compare to another image you are familiar with or one that we provide? And image to world. What in this big world of ours would you compare and connect this image to? So once again, as you're looking at the image, think about how you might relate to this image. Is there anything in this image that feels familiar, or you have some background that it brings up or reminds you of? And someone asked if I could state again about image to image. So image to image would be, how does this compare to another image? So we would provide another image that we can compare and contrast with. And image to world, of course, is connecting this image to things in the world that you could compare and connect with.
One thing that I do, which is an image to self creation, is to ask my students to either draw or tell me what they would include in the picture of Thanksgiving. And we actually do this before we look at any images of Thanksgiving. Paige and I were talking about this in relation to ourselves. Paige is from a big Italian family, and so spaghetti is going to be on the Thanksgiving table. That is just part of their Thanksgiving celebration, which is not something that I might include. And so there are little things and certainly big things that are differences. There are numerous primary source sets on the Library of Congress site. The nice thing is that you have a whole packet of a variety of resources in one place, and there are also excellent teacher's guides if you need help in using them. I go back to these again and again as I'm working on different projects.
And of course, the image that we've been working with, the first Thanksgiving, 1621, came from the Library of Congress, and it has many more artifacts, primary sources, and images that you can have the students add to their knowledge and compare and connect. So as you think about sharing visual representations with your students, some of the many strategies that you can use that can help them see more deeply, like artists, like scientists, is to observe and describe, question and investigate, explore viewpoints, compare and connect. So we are now going to, Susan's going to apply some of these strategies and make some more connections with some additional content.
The following strategy is from the Compare and Connect category, and is called I Used to Think, Now I Think. I used a photograph from the Library of Congress collections for this activity. Now, whenever we start with any image, I always ask my students to take time to observe and describe. They may do this silently or they may write it down, but that's the starting point. For my students with this exercise and for you, I have 3 questions I'd like you to think about, but don't post any answers right now. If you've already posted them, that's fine. Oh my gosh, Patty, I cannot believe that. You will, it's a small world, isn't it? You're going to see these questions again at the end of the activity and answer them. My students would actually write these down, and then they'd continue to revise as we went along. I could project the image, or I could have individual copies. I have a class set of plastic magnifying glasses that I ordered from Oriental Trading Company, and I love to let the students use those to really examine the details. Okay, so in your mind, then, have this photograph, and remember, we're thinking about what time period and what happened before, and then what was she thinking. And so I used to think, but now you have a little bit more information about this jailed woman. Does anything that you read here cause you to reconsider any of those answers that you had before? Don't tell us what your answers were, but type yes or no if you're reconsidering or not reconsidering any of your answers.
So glad to see.
Oh, I love seeing those yeses. Oh yes, if I have a whole class of no's, then I'm really upset. All right, so we have a group of women here. We can use the observe and describe technique in having students describe what's going on here. What do they think is going on here? What do they see happening? Not inferring, but what they see happening. And we learned that Mrs. Weed was actually a member of this group, the National Women's Party. So now I think, does anything in the information above, in the image, cause you to reconsider any of your previous answers? Oh, I'm starting to get some no's.
No.
I'm starting to get some no's. Okay.
We might need more information.
All right. A little more information. We have a poster here. Now, would this cause you to reconsider any of your answers? And we have another group here. This is one where students may actually need to describe what's going on. And again, does anything in this photograph cause you to reconsider any of your answers? We have another group here, and again, an opportunity to revise your thinking. Now, let me just add that you can shorten or lengthen this activity depending on the time you have available. I wanted to actually include several resources here so that you could see the variety of resources. There's an excellent primary source set on suffrage. Not all of the resources in this exercise came from that set, but there are some excellent resources here. We have a different type of resource here, revealing some substantial information. And again, an opportunity to revise your original thinking. Our last photograph here, a great one, again, to have students describe before they reconsider. And again, to think, is there anything here that would cause me to reconsider any of my answers? So now we're back to the original image. So let's look at our 3 questions. See if you can kind of combine your answers to the top 3 in one post. What happened before the photograph was taken? Oh, so, I'm sorry, in what time period do you think the picture was taken? What happened before it was taken? And what is she thinking? We got lots of typing going on.
Yeah. Faith used this at an exhibition at the History Center in Indianapolis.
I'm going to go ahead with this as you all are typing to think, okay, no, I think, Clarissa, I think that's perfectly okay to say, you know, I didn't even know that this was a woman in the very beginning. No, that's perfectly fine. Did you reconsider and revise any of your answers? And if you did, to ask the students, or to ask you perhaps, what one piece of information most influenced your revision? And so, you know, to think about that as well and have the students say, this is when I really changed my mind. And this is when I felt that I was on the right track. I thought that you might like to know a little bit more about the subject of our photograph. since we're getting ready to come up on an election, certainly I, as a woman, think of what many women went through so that I might have the right to vote. And additionally, I thought you might like to see a picture of what Mrs. Reed looked like when she was in jail, and then as a younger woman in the second photograph. There's an additional thinking routine in observing and describing an artful thinking called the beginning, middle, and end that we love to use. If this image were the beginning of a story, what's going to happen next? If it's the middle of a story, what might have happened before and after? And if it's the end of the story, then what was the story? And so that's a great technique to use as well.
Absolutely, and you can do that with so many images and really have your students think about that as long, in terms of a timeline too. Time flies when you're having fun. Susan and I, we want to have time for questions, but we're going to share some additional resources that have been useful for us for visual literacy. Some of my favorites include the Smithsonian American Art Museum. At the education links at that resource, there are so many great works of art and teacher resources and fabulous questions to ask about that.
I wanted to just mention one thing about the Alabama Archives site. It has a remarkable collection of civil rights resources, and I love reading like a historian because it engages students in historical inquiry. I love anything that's already set up for teachers, and these all have great resources, but then they also have great teacher's guides and lesson plans already set up. Of course, we love the Library of Congress. That's why we're all here. National Archives and Records also has a wonderful education site, as does the Smithsonian.
There are so many image resources. I can sit all day and look at the Life magazine resource. I really encourage you to take a look at that. There are images, clip art, pictures, and image search galleries, and Google has wonderful images as well. Of course, the Library of Congress fine prints. This Opinionated Art, A Window into the Fine Art Print Collection, is a fabulous article that I wanted to make note of, and I really encourage our listeners to read this as well. This is a list of additional resources for primary sources that Susan really likes too. I think you provided this.
Yes,
Susan.
These are sources that I use with my students in my social studies methods course to find primary sources, not necessarily images, but other types of primary resources.
Oh, I love that Karen mentioned there's even a Head Start version of Picturing America. I have found that, Karen. That is fabulous. One of my areas of expertise is early childhood, and I encourage everyone to look that up as well if that's an area you work in. These are just some more visual literacy learner activities, just some starters on getting students to describe and to observe and to connect and interpret and all the things we've talked about. Things like writing a conversation between characters, imagining that an artist's show has just opened. This will give you some more ideas for implementing these strategies that we've been sharing today.
I always love asking students what they smell or hear when they look at an image. And at first, they look at me like I'm crazy. And then they immediately start in, and it's amazing the things that they come up with.
Lisa and Alyssa have asked about a handout page. I believe all of this will be available to us after this conference, but feel free to email us, and I don't mind sending all the resources at all.
Absolutely. We would love to.
Or let us know that what you're doing that's related to visual literacy and sharing these ideas. Also, any additional resources that you've used that has enhanced your teaching, we would love to hear from you too.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I wish we could have seen you in person. It was, again, so fun to see so many people from so many different places.